I paid for my sister's education while working 2 jobs, just for her to call me a loser during a family dinner. She was surprised when I stopped paying her rent and told everyone the reason I could no longer sustain her lifestyle. When my younger sister, Luísa, got into her dream university, the whole family acted like it was the greatest achievement of all time. My parents were beaming with pride. Luísa was already talking about the career she would follow, while I was in the corner, silently calculating how we would pay for it. My parents didn't have the money to cover her education. They made that clear when they started discussing it in family conversations. Luísa is so smart, but university is so expensive these days, my mother said, looking at me as if I didn't already know where that conversation was going. I didn't have much. I worked as a mechanic and was trying to save up to buy a house, but Luísa was my sister, and I thought, how could I not help? So I began contributing. At first, it was small things, her books, a bit of food. But it didn't stop there. Soon, I was paying her rent, the bills, even her nights out when she needed to unwind. Every time she asked for money, it came with a, "I'll pay you back when I graduate," or "Mom and Dad can't help right now." The worst part was that my parents acted like it was my obligation to help. Family takes care of family, they would say, as if I wasn't already killing myself working 2 jobs to keep things afloat. Luísa, meanwhile, acted like the world revolved around her. She posted photos of fancy parties and weekend trips, smiling as if she weren't living off me. I kept telling myself it was temporary. When she graduated, it would all be worth it. But deep down, I started resenting the fact that my life was on hold while hers was advancing at full speed. And I was the one paying for it. I thought things would get better once Luísa adjusted to the university routine. I imagined she'd realize how much I was doing for her and show some gratitude. But if anything changed, it was her sense of entitlement, which only grew. The first real sign was her spending habits. While I skipped meals and worked night shifts to pay her rent, Luísa flaunted her new wardrobe on social media. Designer bags, trendy shoes, fancy dinners, things I could never afford. At first, I tried to justify it. Maybe she got a part-time job, or she's just exaggerating to look good. But when I asked about it, she shrugged. "Everyone dresses like this at university," she said. "I don't want to look out of place." It wasn't just her attitude towards money. It was everything. She treated me like a walking ATM. She never asked how I was or needed help. My parents weren't any better. Whenever I tried to talk about how much I was struggling, they made me feel guilty to shut me up. "She's your sister," my mom would say. "She's building her future. You should be proud to help her." But it wasn't just about helping. It was about sacrificing. My weekends disappeared, my savings were gone, and that house I'd always dreamed of. Forget it. Meanwhile, Luísa didn't even bother to send a thank you note. Instead, she'd call to complain about her professors. It was always something like, "I had to redo an entire paper because the professor said it wasn't up to par," as if he knew anything. Or, "I can't handle this much work." And I, tired after a double shift at the shop, had to listen without saying a word. After all, if I dared to say anything, I'd be seen as insensitive and incapable of understanding how hard she was working for her future. That's when the dinner happened. An invitation from my mom, as always disguised as an attempt at family unity. But I knew it was just another chance for everyone to pretend everything was fine. Still, I accepted, thinking maybe it would be good to have a calm moment away from work and bills. I arrived at my parents' house straight from the shop, my hands still marked with grease, and was met with the same coldness as usual. My mom was busy in the kitchen, and my dad was on the couch watching TV. Apparently, Luísa was already in her room, resting from the exhausting week she'd had. Of course, because studying for a few hours and partying on the weekends must be exhausting. When we finally sat down at the table, I tried to focus on the food and tune out the conversation, but Luísa didn't take long to start her performance, as she always did. "You won't believe what happened at university," she began, with that exaggerated tone only she could use. "I had to redo an entire paper because the professor said it wasn't up to the expected level," as if he knew anything. No one responded right away. My dad let out a grunt of support, my mom shook her head, and I continued chewing, trying not to say what I really thought. But she didn't stop there. "It's so frustrating. I'm one of the best students, but it feels like they just want to put me down. It's like they don't want to see me succeed. You guys get what I mean, right? I took a deep breath, counted to 10 in my head, but before I could stop myself, my mom decided to throw some fuel on the fire. Luísa, darling, don't worry. You're brilliant, and we all know that. Some professors are just jealous of your potential. I couldn't hold back. Or maybe they're trying to teach you something, and you just don't want to listen. The silence at the table was instant. Luísa shot me a look that could kill, but I kept eating, pretending I didn't notice what it meant. She asked, with a voice full of indignation, "So, maybe it's time to stop blaming everyone and start taking some responsibility? You're at university, Luísa. You're not a child anymore. You can't expect the world to treat you like a princess." My mom tried to intervene, but Luísa was already ready for the attack. "Oh, sure. And coming from who? The mechanic who never left the garage. Please, you don't even know what responsibility is. All you do is fix cars and complain about life. You know what you are? A loser. That's what you are." The word hit like a slap. For a moment, everything stopped. I looked at her, incredulous, trying to process the fact that the same person I had supported for years, the one who lived off me, was insulting me in front of the whole family. I slowly stood up, placing the napkin on the table. My mom started to say something, but I raised my hand, silencing her. "Enough. I'm done." I looked Luísa directly in the eyes. "You want to call me a loser, right? But you know what? This loser paid your rent, your bills, and even your damn parties, while you pretended to be an adult. This loser gave up his own dreams so you could live yours. And what do I get in return? Insults." She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. "From now on, it's over. I'm not paying anything anymore. I won't sustain your princess lifestyle. You want to call me a loser? Fine. But now you'll have to figure out how to pay your bills on your own. Good luck with that." My mom started crying, and my dad, in his typical apathy, just murmured something like, "We'll talk later," but I wasn't willing to listen anymore. I grabbed my things and left, leaving the table in silence. On the way home, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief for finally saying what needed to be said, but anger for letting the situation get to this point. I knew Luísa wouldn't take it easily. She was good at manipulating people, and my parents would probably do everything they could to make me back down. But this time, it wasn't going to work. When I got home, my phone started ringing. It was my mom. I ignored it. Then messages started coming through. First from her, then from Luísa. "You can't do this to me. I need you. How am I supposed to pay rent now?" I read them all, but didn't respond. I knew this war was far from over, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a chance to take my life back. When I finally got home that night, I was still shaking with anger. The word loser echoed in my head like a knife spinning endlessly. The audacity of Luísa calling me that, after everything I'd done for her, was unbearable. I knew she was used to being treated like the center of the universe, but this had crossed all boundaries. However, as I sat on the living room couch, I began to realize something different. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from carrying the weight of her choices. Free from sacrificing my own dreams for someone who didn't even know the meaning of gratitude. This thought brought an unexpected relief, and I decided that, from now on, I would be a priority in my own life. The next day, I woke up early and went straight to the workshop. It was a Saturday, but that didn't matter to me, since I worked every day to sustain a life that wasn't mine. As I tightened screws and changed parts, I felt something different in the air, a new determination. Maybe it was time to change. Maybe it was time to finally think about my own future. However, as expected, Luísa wasn't going to let this slide. Before noon, my phone was already full of messages from her and my parents. Her messages ranged from desperate pleas to subtle threats. "If you don't pay my rent, I'll be evicted. You don't care about my future." And of course, the classic manipulation. "Mom and Dad are so disappointed in you. They never thought you'd be so selfish." I took a deep breath and decided it was time to face this once and for all. I called her. When she answered, Her voice was full of anger and disdain. Finally, I thought she would continue ignoring me. How can you be so petty? I can't believe you're actually leaving me in this situation. Luísa, I just want to know one thing, I started, trying to stay calm. Do you really think I'm a loser? She was silent for a moment, but it didn't take long for her to retort. Well, I was just being honest. I mean, look at you, stuck in that mediocre job while I'm trying to build a real career. I snorted a short, bitter laugh. So, you really think your life is better than mine? That I'm inferior to you because I'm a mechanic? That's not it, she said, but her voice betrayed the lie. I just think you could have done more with your life. Done more. Finally, I snapped. Luísa, do you know what I've done with my life? I dedicated it entirely to supporting you. I paid for your university, your rent, your bills, your parties, while you spent my money on clothes and trips. I was skipping meals, working double shifts, and yet you think you have the right to belittle me? You have no idea what responsibility is. She tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. You know what's more ironic? You're sitting there thinking you're superior, but who's going to be evicted now that I stopped paying everything? Who's going to have to learn to live in the real world, without depending on me? And you know what else? I'm done. Done being used. Done being the idiot who does everything while you live like a spoiled princess. There was a long silence on the other end of the line until she finally replied, her voice trembling. I just thought you wanted to help the family. I didn't know you felt so much hate toward me. Hate? I retorted. I don't hate you, Luísa. I feel disappointment. I feel sadness that you never saw what I did for you. And now, I feel relief, because I finally chose myself. Before she could respond, I hung up. My heart was racing, but for the first time, I didn't feel regret. I knew she would have to face the consequences of her own arrogance. And, as expected, she screwed up. 2 weeks later, I got a message from my mom saying that Luísa had been evicted. Apparently, her amazing internship didn't pay enough to cover even half the rent. She tried to ask friends for help, but, as is common with people like her, there was no one really willing to sacrifice for her. Irony, right? Now she finally understood what I had done for her. My parents, of course, tried to intervene. My mom called almost every day, saying I was being cruel, that Luísa was my sister and I had an obligation to help, but this time I didn't give in. I didn't respond, didn't back down, and let them deal with the consequences of their choices. After all, who decided I was responsible for her? It wasn't me. Meanwhile, I started investing in myself. I opened a savings account, something I hadn't done in years. I began researching courses to specialize in advanced automotive mechanics, and I even considered starting my own business. For the first time, I had hope for my own future. And Luísa? Well, I heard she had to move back to our parents' house, something she swore she would never do. I imagine it was a hard blow to her ego, but honestly, it was no longer my problem. I was finally free, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live my own life my way.